So we've seen how to add labels to our apps, which are great for displaying fairly static text. But what if we want to do something that the user can actually interact with? Well, the first of those that we're going to look at is text inputs. So if we just type text, then you'll get this text field option. So drag one in, just as you did with the labels, and we'll drag it underneath the label there. And that, you can see, just gives you a very standard box which the user can then tap on and enter some text in. So this time we need to actually see how that works from the user's point of view. So let's just run this app and we can just take a look and see what happens when we tap inside the text field. We should find that the keyboard pops up and the user is able to enter text just like you normally would in a browser window or an email window or whatever it is that you want to type into on your phone. So there's our lovely example app running on our iPhone 6 simulator. You can of course use a different simulator if you like. So if we just tap in the box there we go, there's our iPhone keyboard, and we can type in hello world or whatever we fancy. We can also type with the keyboard, and you'll find that that makes the software keyboard disappear. Now that can be very useful when testing your app, but obviously the user generally doesn't have a hardware keyboard attached, so you really need to focus on the software keyboard for most of your work. But it's worth being aware of the hardware menu in the iOS simulator and just having a look at the options here. So the keyboard, these two ones are particularly useful. So you can toggle whether or not the software keyboard is working, and you can also decide whether or not you're going to allow input from your Mac keyboard. So if we switch that off, then this soft keyboard comes back in. So that's just something to be aware of when you're testing out your app. Now, as with labels, there are loads of options with text fields, and we'll just have a very quick look through. You can choose the type of text there. You can choose the color. So let's make this sort of a horrendous red. As before, system font, text alignment. The placeholder text is what appears by default in your label, but will disappear as soon as the person starts typing or taps in the field. You can add a background image or disable it, change the border style. Again, as before, spend a bit of time playing around and seeing what you can do here. A couple of options I'm just going to point you to are keyboard type. That's really useful. So if you want the user only to be able to enter numbers, for example, then the number pad is really useful. You've got a URL, that's like a domain name, so for google.com or something, or an email address. So make the most of those if you know what sort of a thing the user is going to be typing into the box. And turning off spell checking and correction can also be very useful if the user is entering something that you know isn't going to be a standard word. And the other bits and pieces are more or less as before. You've got the alpha, stretching, etc. So do have a little play around with those. The other thing we're going to look at are buttons. So just type it in there and then drag it in. Let's have it just above the label. Why not? Nope, you can't drag it into the preview. Have to drag it into the view controller. And buttons, so these come by default with the iOS 7 or iOS 8 redesign. They don't look that much like buttons, but they do respond very nicely to touch. So let's just run this app again and see what this button does by default when we tap on it. Here we go. If I tap that button, you can see it responds pretty instantly and really nicely. So it's pretty clear that this is something to interact with. And if you leave it as the default color and the default text, then the user will recognize that as a button rather than just some text. So then, as before, we've got all of the options. We can change the text either by double-clicking on the button itself or by changing the title. And then we'll need to stretch it out so that we've got enough room for it. And again, we've got text color, shadow color, background images, etc. All sorts of alignment, zoom, alpha, all of the same things that we have for labels and the text fields. So as before, do spend a bit of time just playing around with these and add a few buttons and a few labels and redesign them, experiment with layouts and colors and backgrounds and all of those things, and that'll be a great way to learn how it all fits together. In the next video, we're going to see how to actually run some code so our app is more than just a collection of labels, buttons, and text fields that don't actually do anything.